Today I'm going to paint using my favourite triad of colours. So I've got some raw sienna, burnt sienna and French ultramarine, and you can do a huge amount with just these three colours. Now I did a very simple sketch from a reference photo provided by a Patreon member, and I just sketched out the simple elements just so I've got the path running up there and a couple of trees. I actually invented a tree on the right hand side as well for a little bit of balance. You can download the reference photo from Patreon, and I'll also put it in a members only post on YouTube. So if you want to get the reference photo, become a member and then you'll be able to save that for yourself. Now I just brought in a little bit of water over the top of the paper. Not too much, I just want a little bit just so the paint moves around. And I'll start off with a little bit of French ultramarine, touch a tiny little bit of burnt sienna into it, just to take the shine off it a little bit, just tone it down a touch. And so we'll start up in the sky. I'm going to do quite a big blue sky. Now it's quite an overcast day in the reference photo, so I'm going to change that. I'm going to invent a little bit of light, so make the sky really quite bright and blue. Let's touch a little bit of raw sienna into that French ultra this time for a little bit of variation. And so I'm going to design the sky a little bit as well. So bring in some of that blue, and then I'm going to have a nice band of cloud running down, kind of leading the eye down towards the focal point. So soften that blue, make it a little bit lighter as it comes down to the horizon. And let's grab some burnt sienna and a little bit of raw sienna. I can mix that together and mix that in with some of the blue that's in the palette as well. And bring that in very light, very dilute. So I can touch that in, I can touch that up against where I've just laid that blue in, and it'll all soften and join together. So not overdoing the sky in this one. There's quite a lot in the land really, so I can have a fairly simple sky. Just enough up there really, so there's a little bit of design and it's leading the eye down towards the trees in the distance, and the trees in the foreground is going to be quite dark on the left, and then the two main trees on the right hand side are really going to be quite bright. I'm going to use that as an excuse to get a good sense of light in this painting. So I can bring that sky down all the way now to the horizon. Now let's pick up a little bit more raw sienna, and I can bring a wash across the land. Very light, very dilute at this stage. Just touch a bit of burnt sienna in there. Let's get a little bit ultramarine. So working my way around the three colours and getting little bits of variation. I will bring in some texture over the top of this in a moment anyway, but it's still good to get some variation in at this stage and just map out some of the darker areas with a little bit blue, and the lighter areas can be more raw sienna. So bringing this wash pretty much all the way down now. Now while that's all still wet, I can touch in a little bit of burnt sienna. Allow that all to run together. Have a little leading line going up that path. A lot of this is going to soften and diffuse anyway, but it's quite a nice idea to touch it in while it's all still wet. Let's get a little bit of ultramarine into that mixture, and there are going to be some shadows across the land, little bits of scrubby bush areas and things like that, and I can suggest those very simply at this stage with a slightly darker mixture. I want to talk briefly about the sponsor for today's video, Meaden Art Supplies, and some of their storage solutions. And I've got their brush holder organiser, which has been a complete game changer for me. Keeps all of my brushes nice and tidy and in one place. It's from their professional range, so it's full solid wood construction, really nice thing. I've got some of their 100% cotton paper stacked up over there behind, and I've got this 6-drawer storage unit which the brush holder fits perfectly on top. And I only use 3 of the drawers, and I'll show you why in a second. So I've got all of my watercolour tubes in there, nicely organised and ready to go. And now the spare drawers from that I keep as little trays that I can put brushes and little bits and pieces, and I can move those around my studio. I've got this all metal brush washer, lovely copper handle, really nice thing. I really like that. I think it's going to last a lifetime. Perfect for watercolour in the studio. And also their porcelain palette that I've had for a long time, never clean it, but it's perfect. I've got all of my paints laid out in there, good size for mixing. I use their tabletop easel as well, and I can adjust that to any angle that I need it to be. So you can see there roughly the angle that I work at, about sort of 20-30 degrees. But it's a good strong thing, never let me down. But if you head over to meadenart.com and use the code CSART12, you can get 12% off everything on their website. Now I've allowed the paper to dry for about 2 minutes, but not dried it with a hairdryer or anything like that. So a little bit of moisture is remaining in the paper, and that's going to enable me to lay some trees in over the top without any blooms forming, but still keeping a soft edge. So I'll start with some pretty much neat raw sienna, and I can lay that in to these trees. Let's touch a bit of burnt sienna in there as well, and I've got the light coming in from the right hand side, so I can have quite a glow to the trees on the right hand side, and they can be more in shadow on the left. Now I don't need to copy the exact shape of the trees in the reference. It's just all about building up an impression, and the painting for me is more about light and the atmosphere and the feeling, the overall feeling. So there's no need to get bogged down in the detail. Touched a little bit of ultramarine into that mixture, so made it a tiny little bit darker. So I've got the shadows on the left, like I said. Now there's a little bank of trees a little bit further away. Can treat that as one joined together shape. Treat that very simply. Don't want to detract from anything, so just one shape is good enough for that, and then bring some of these little marks over to the left hand side. A little bit more French ultramarine into that mixture. And now while this is all still wet, I can touch back in and create the shadows. And while that paint's still wet, I can continue to work back into it without fear of any problems, without any cauliflowers or blooms happening. So let's bring some of that shadow colour down across the land now. I'm going to start making little connections. So bringing in some of these slightly darker tones now and joining everything together in a very simple way, not too hard an edge. Now I can start building up a suggestion of some of the texture across the land. And there's lots of grass and all kinds of things there, but I don't want to start painting anything like that. I'm just treating everything as a series of shapes all joined together. Just letting the brush dance around and create little marks. And then working with what starts to emerge on the paper, as opposed to looking too intently at the reference and studying it too hard. So squinting my eyes also when I look at the reference, so I'm not tempted by any of the detail. All I can see are the shapes, and that's what I'm going to paint. So let's make it slightly warmer down in the foreground, a little bit more burnt sienna. And along the edge of the path there. Now you don't always have to be tied in fully to everything that's in a reference photo. Just treat it as a reference. It's just a whole bunch of information really that you can draw from and create your own composition from. And just pick out the elements that you like, some of the shapes that you like, and then you can feel free to move things around and place them wherever you want. Now before that dries off too much, I'm going to scratch out some highlights for some tree trunks. Now I think there's silver birch trees in the reference photos, so let's get some of that light on those trunks, and I can modify that a little bit later with some darker paint. I can just strengthen some of these shapes, but it's a good idea to get these little highlights in now at this stage. Now before that dries off too much in that sky, I want to start working on that darker tree. There's a tiny bit of moisture still in the paper, so I don't need to bring in the mist bottle, and I wouldn't want to at this stage either. I could end up getting some little spots and marks forming on the paper, so let's just try and work quickly, get this tree in before everything becomes too dry. So it's a mixture of ultramarine, raw sienna and burnt sienna, all kind of mixed together, keeping it slightly on the bluer side. But not mixing the paint too well either. And so I'm getting some blue and some slightly browner areas just emerging on the paper by not mixing it too well in the palette. Now glancing really at the reference for the overall shape of this tree. Like I said before, I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail. It's more about the light and the shadows and the atmosphere in this one that I'm trying to achieve. So I'm trying to create a pleasing shape for this tree, but not worrying too much about getting the shape exactly right. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's more about creating an interesting painting. So make that mixture slightly darker and touch that in while it's still wet. And pick up a slightly smaller brush. And again, while it's still wet, I'm going to put the trunk in and a couple of branches, and I can join that in to the shape of the tree and it'll all become one. Flick out the suggestion of a couple of branches. Don't need to put them all in at this stage. Let's make that trunk a tiny little bit thicker as it meets the land. And then join that down into the land as well, so connecting that shape right down, anchoring that tree. Okay, I've completely dried everything, so now I can introduce some shadows and some slightly harder edges and a few finishing touches, but I need to get some distance in there, so let's go in with some French ultramarine, a little touch of burnt sienna. Again, just takes the edge off it, and now I can bring in a tiny little bit of water with the mist bottle Not too much, it's just the tiniest little bit really. And so just bringing in a shape of some trees off in the distance. And it's quite nice putting the distance in at this stage of a painting, especially if you don't want a darker area running behind all those trees. You want the light to remain, and so if you get the trees in first and add the distance towards the end of the painting, it enables you to keep those lighter edges. So let's have a suggestion of some distance pretty much all the way across. I can have it going all the way out of the painting there on the left. Make that a little bit lighter in tone though, so it doesn't stand out too much, and also on the right hand side. And so basically that's the distance put in, that simply. So let's get a little bit more blue, a little bit more burnt sienna. Keeping it on the bluer side still, but slightly darker than the distance. And I can strengthen some of the shadow at the base of these trees. Let's get a little bit more blue. And bring a shadow across the path. Connect that into the tree on the left hand side. Now again, strengthen the shadow at the base of the tree. Not too much. I've already got the shadows in place for the majority of those trees, just making it slightly darker at the bottom. And again, bring some darker areas across, making sure I've got little connections here and there. There's some scrubby grass and things on that left hand side, and it all connects and joins everything together. So let's get some of that in, bring in some more blue across the land. Can make those trees in the distance a tiny little bit darker as well at the bottom. But everything at this stage really is just a suggestion. There's no point in overworking it and getting carried away with detail. It's just about getting these finishing touches in to pull the painting together. Now this bush is quite dark on the right hand side down in the foreground, and that helps to balance the composition. I think the tree on the left is quite dark, so it's a good idea to have something darker on the right hand side as well, just so it's not weighted too much to one side or the other. So let's get a little bit more blue, a tiny bit of burnt sienna into it. Let's mix up quite a large puddle of paint. And so let's create some shadows coming all the way across the land, especially down in the foreground now. Close off the bottom of the painting, really frame the scene and push the eye more in to those bright trees, and it makes the light stand out on those a little bit more, having quite a strong shadow across the foreground. Now, it would possibly be tempting to grab some red and make the shadow a little bit more purple, but I'm sticking with the three colours that I started with. It's an exercise in using a triad, and I'm going to stick to that. Colour harmony is pretty much guaranteed when working like this, and so I'm not going to be tempted to sort of go off piste slightly and start adding more colours than I intended to. So let's mix up a little bit of darker, slightly darker paint. I just want to get a bit of texture in this tree. It's a little bit flat, so I can introduce a few darks, mainly on the left hand side, slightly more in shadow, leave some of the lighter areas on the right. Let's switch to a smaller brush. It's just a size 2 sable. And this really strengthens some of the dark in that trunk and at the base of the tree. And I can flick out a few more branches at this stage. Don't need to do too many, just a few here and there. Let's have one coming out the top of the tree there. Touch a little bit more blue into that mixture. Let's get some dark along the edge of the path. So I'm really starting to pull everything together now with these few simple little dark areas. And it's at this stage in a painting really where you can really start to overwork. So I've got to be quite careful. And I just always have to remember it's always a suggestion and not a statement when doing areas in the land. So just get some little leading lines up this path, just a tiny little wavy line, just to lead the eye up and round the corner. And I could treat it as simply as that. I don't need to do really much more. A few little dots with the brush as well, not being tempted to flick up thousands of bits of grass, which will always overwork. And now where I scratched out those little highlights in these trees, I can touch in using a very small brush, just touch in a little bit dark just on the left hand side of that highlight, and that strengthens that shape and creates the sense of light catching a tree trunk. And now again, suggesting everything, I don't need to do too much. Just strengthen that trunk and then maybe flick out a couple of extra little branches. But really being mindful not to do too many. Let's have a tiniest suggestion of a little bit of texture in those trees, a little bit further away. Again, make sure I don't do too much of it. Okay, that's the painting finished. Very simple painting in many ways, but I think also quite effective. I've invented a little bit of light. The reference photo was quite an overcast day, but I wanted some light and some shadow, really try and make something with a little bit more impact. Nobody really wants to paint a grey, cloudy day anyway, so always add some shadows and it gives the painting a little bit more life. And I'm really quite pleased with the way it's come out. I like the orange raw sienna glow to those trees. I think that really makes the difference. And the large darker tree on the left, creating that L-shaped composition. But do give it a go. Let me know how you get on. And if you want the reference photo, then join me over on Patreon or become a member on YouTube and you'll be able to download the reference. If you've got any suggestions for content or you want me to paint your photographs, then again join me over on Patreon and send me a message and I'll see if I can do that for you. But thanks for watching everybody as always, and see you next time.